Hello, my name is Vanessa Clark. I'm the State School Fund Program Manager at Oregon Department of Education, and I'm here to share with you a little bit about State School Fund basics. We're going to talk about the history and philosophy of the State School Fund. First, I want to give some context about Oregon's overall funding for K-12 education. What you see on the screen is a graph representing the 23-24 funding sources for Oregon's public schools. As you can see, the majority of that funding, about 56%, was from state resources. There was also about 33% from local sources and about 11% from federal sources. In total, for the 23-24 school year, Oregon's K-12 schools received about $10.9 billion in funding from these three sources. So this slide here is showing us a way that funds can be classified for school districts, and that is as either unrestricted or restricted funds. So as the name kind of gives away, unrestricted funds can be used for any legal purpose. And restricted funds have to be used for a specific category or a specific purpose. And a lot of times there's reporting that goes along with that as well. So for restricted funds, you have to be a lot more careful and you have a little bit of extra work that goes into spending those funds. Now, when we look at local, state, and federal sources of funding, this chart shows us the orange portion of each bar is unrestricted and the blue portion is restricted. So you can see from local sources of funding, they're almost all unrestricted with just a little bit of restricted funding. For state sources, they are also mostly unrestricted, but there is a little bit more restricted funds there. And then for federal funds, they're the opposite. They're almost all restricted with just a little sliver of unrestricted funds. So let's come back to the State School Fund. What you see here on the slide is, again, we've got this broken out into local, state, and federal sources. And what we're showing now is that the blue portion of each of these bars is the portion of that source of funding that is considered part of the State School Fund. And the orange part of the bar is the portion of that source of funding that is not considered part of the State School Fund. So you can see for local resources, that's probably about 2/3 that is the local funds that are part of the State School Fund. And then for state resources, you can see we've got about 5/6 of that source of funding is part of the State School Fund. Now, on the other hand, we have federal resources, which are not at all part of the State School Fund. So what exactly is the State School Fund? Well, it is the combination of state and local resources that are dedicated to the operation of K-12 public schools in Oregon. Each biennium, the legislature appropriates the state portion of funds for the State School Fund. ODE manages those funds and distributes them monthly, except for June, according to the formula described in statute. The State School Fund is comprised of the general purpose grant, which is what most people think of when they think of the State School Fund. And then additionally, there are carve-outs for statewide programs, and there are subgrants. So next, let's talk about the State School Fund philosophy. So this is really the concepts behind how the State School Fund was designed. Those key concepts of the philosophy are equity, equalization, and adequacy. So equity is about determining how each school district has the resources they need to support the students in their community. And in the State School Fund, this is done. First, we have a lot of the formula is driven by student enrollment. So that would be average daily membership, or ADMR, in the formula. And then weights are added to that. And the weights in the State School Fund formula identify unique student needs and district characteristics that require additional support. The next component is equalization. So Oregon's State School Fund is unique because it takes a combination of local resources, and state resources, and combines those funds to provide an equal per ADMW or per weighted student amount that school districts are funded on. And then the final component is adequacy. And adequacy is about ensuring that there's enough money going into the formula to support school district needs to support all of those students across the state. And adequacy is really determined by the legislature to ensure that there's enough money in the state school fund for those needs. This slide gives you a visual of how student enrollment and weights have changed over time. So you can see there's a blue bar showing the weights in the state school fund, and then a maroon bar showing average daily membership, or ADM. And so you can see that over time, those are generally rising and falling along with each other. You might notice here this little bit of a sharp increase. This was due to, in the 2015-16 school year, full-day kindergarten was implemented. So suddenly students who had only counted for 0.5 ADM now counted for a full 1.0. And then here you see a sharp decline. This was a decrease in enrollment after the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, when we saw decreases in enrollment in Oregon's public schools. And you can see that those decreases have leveled off, but they haven't caught back up to where they were pre-pandemic. Now this next slide is an interesting one because it gives a really good picture of the equalization component of the philosophy that I mentioned earlier. So what you see here, there are 197 bars across this slide. That's one for each school district in Oregon. The blue portion of the bar is the portion of local resources that district receives. And then the red portion is the portion of state resources that district receives. So you can see, looking across the graph, it's pretty equal. This is general purpose grant per weighted student, so per ADMW. So each school district is receiving pretty much the same amount per ADMW, but they're receiving a different proportion of state versus local resources. Now you might notice that there are some small deviations from that per ADMW equalization factor, and that is part of the formula. That would be due to the teacher experience factor. You might also notice that there are a few bars that are all blue and that they are taller than the rest of the bars. So according to Oregon's law, if a school district receives more in local resources than what the state school fund formula distributes, they get to keep that excess local resources. The state does not take that back. And so that's why you see a few bars where those are school districts that receive only local resources and no state resources for their general purpose grant. So this is a little bit of a busy graph, but I think it tells a good story. So what we have here are state and local revenues as a percentage of total revenue. So what you can see, the bars on the bottom of the graph, the blue portion of each bar represents state revenue, and the red portion or maroon portion of each bar represents local resources. And so as over time, you can see those growing together. We have a graph showing you from about the 1990-91 school year all the way through the 23-24 school year. So you can see over time how that total amount has grown. You can also see the green and gold line graph here, and that is a percentage. The green is the percentage of state revenue, and the gold is the percentage of local revenue. And so what you might notice is that in the 90s, there was a flip. At first, on this graph, school districts received about 2/3 of their resources from local revenues and about 1/3 from state resources. And then it flipped. So now school districts are receiving about 2/3 from the state resources and about 1/3 from local resources. This was due to a series of changes in tax law in Oregon in the 90s. There was a measure that capped property taxes so that they can only grow 3% per year. And due to that, the state also had to change how they funded schools because they knew that it would continue to be more expensive to operate school districts each year, and that inflation might outpace that 3% growth in property taxes. And so that's when the state school fund and the equalization formula were implemented. And that's why you see that flip from 1/3 state and 2/3 local to now 2/3 state and 1/3 local. I hope this state school fund basics history and philosophy has given you a little bit more information about the state school fund. We invite you to reach out to us anytime you have questions. My name again is Vanessa Clark. I'm the State School Fund Program Manager, and my colleague Jared Nunn is the State School Fund Coordinator. Thank you so much for your time today. Have a great day.